to be removed. But Tavis, before we wrap up this discussion, we're speaking today on the eve of the federal holiday that honors Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. Last year, we had you on just before your broadcast of the special about Dr. Martin Luther King called MLK, A Call to Conscience. This was one of the clips, one of the most famous clips of Dr. Martin Luther King's speech that he gave on April 4th, 1967, here in New York at Riverside Church, a year to the day before he was assassinated.
I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. A time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam.
Martin Luther King knew when he gave that speech that it would set off a firestorm.
It's the speech that challenges us, and in that sense it's his most important. That we are uncomfortable with that speech tells us something.
Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. For such questions mean that the inquirers have not really known me, my commitment or my calling. Indeed, their question suggests that they do not know the world in which they live.
It was precisely 1 year to the day after this speech that that bullet, which had been chasing him for a long time, finally caught up with him. And I am convinced that that bullet had something to do with that speech.
And that was Vincent Harding, who helped write that speech for Dr. Martin Luther King on April 4th, 1967, that he delivered at the Riverside Church, calling for an end to the war in Vietnam.
As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they asked, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? And I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
The greatest purveyor of violence on earth today, my own government. Let's go to a little more of Dr. King's speech that day.
A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries and say this is not just. It will look at our alliance with the landed gentry of South America and say, this is not just. The Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. America, the richest and most powerful nation in the world, can well lead the way in this revolution of values. That is nothing except a tragic death wish to prevent us from reordering our priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war.
Tavis Smiley, if you would reflect on this less famous speech of Dr. King, not the I Have a Dream speech, but that speech he gave even against the advice of his inner circle, who said, you will lose the support of the leadership in America that is supporting you on civil rights, when he said, I must deal with violence abroad as well as violence at home.
And Amy, as you well know, he did. When King was gunned down on that balcony in Memphis, a year to the day later, as you mentioned after that speech, he was persona non grata in this country. Over 55% of black Americans had turned against their leader, Dr. King. 3/4 of the American people, 3/4 of the American people had turned against Dr. King. He was no longer on the list of the most admired Americans. So the King dies again, persona non grata, on that balcony in Memphis. Here we are now, days away from his actual birthday, January the 15th, days away from his holiday, and this year, as you know, is the 25th anniversary of the King holiday that Ronald Reagan was forced to sign into law. He didn't want to do it, had to do it during his term in the White House. When you hear that speech, it's hard to even add anything more to it, because at once you see how courageous he was and how principled he was. It's why, to this day, I regard Dr. King as the greatest American we have ever produced. I could argue you on FDR, I could argue you about Lincoln, but I regard Dr. King as the greatest American we've ever produced because of his courage, because of his conviction, because of his commitment, because he was a truth teller. His life, in short, was about this: justice for all, service to others, and a love that liberates people. Justice to all, service to others, and a love that liberates people. In that last clip you played, King talked about a revolution of values. How prophetic was he? How propitious is that call right now in this nation for a revolution of our values? And that's why I celebrate what you do, Amy, on this program every day. You are, in the Kingian tradition, the most, I think, courageous voice on TV, the most courageous voice on radio, raising these progressive questions, challenging us to re-examine our assumptions,
Tavis,
to expand our inventory of ideas, and we got to keep moving in that direction.
I wanted to go back, in the light of the shooting this week, to one more clip, and it's President Bill Clinton,
sure,
right after the Columbine massacre in 1999, when 2 student gunmen killed 12 students and a teacher and wounded 24 others. This is President Clinton.
We must do more to reach out to our children and teach them to express their anger and to resolve their conflicts with words, not weapons. And we do know we have to do more to recognize the early warning signs that are sent before children act violently. To the families who have lost their loved ones, to the parents who have lost their beloved children, to the wounded children and their families, to the people of the community of Littleton, I can only say tonight that the prayers of the American people are with you.
That was President Clinton telling the young people of America violence is not the answer. Yet he was saying this against the backdrop of the U.S. bombing Yugoslavia. And now you look at today, the same message to the young people of this country: violence is not the answer, against the backdrop of war. Your final comment, Tavis.
That's why I said a moment ago, I celebrate your voice and your courage in raising these issues again to help us re-examine the assumptions we hold, helping us to expand our inventory of ideas and to look at the world through a different prism, to create a different worldview. It's what this conversation tonight at George Washington University on C-SPAN is all about, trying to get us to wrestle with these critical questions. And presidents have to be held accountable. They are examples too. And the hypocrisy so often has to be called out, and somebody has to have the capacity, the courage to do just that. My grandfather used to say all the time, Tavis, so often when all is said and done, more has been said than done. We got to move beyond saying and not doing. We have to be compassion. We have to be love. We have to be kindness. We have to be those things that we want to see in the world. And it's just amazing to hear that clip from years ago and what we heard last night. Different time, different moment, but almost redux. And so it's got to be more than just about the words that we speak, but rather the deeds that we do.
Tavis Smiley, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll link to all the information about your America's Next chapter that you will be involved with tonight, hosting a nationally televised discussion at George Washington University. This is Democracy Now!